Welcome to the Bible Forum. I'm Warren Sprouse. I want to talk to you tonight about the culture. Do you know who Tucker Carlson is? Tucker Carlson has a program on Fox News every weeknight. He has recently lost some very high-profile advertisers over comments he made earlier this past week when he contended that the current protests are definitely not about black lives. The advertisers who have announced they're pulling ads from Tucker Carlson tonight include ABC, whose parent company is Disney, T-Mobile, and Papa John's Pizza. Carlson said, quote, "If they cared about black lives, they wouldn't put abortion clinics in black neighborhoods," end of quote. They didn't like that. He also said they would instead do their very best to improve the public schools and encourage intact families. Didn't like that either. He said at a moment like this, there's no advantage in cowardice. Tell the truth. And the truth is, this is a good country. Better than any other. Of course we're flawed, but we're trying, unlike most places, and we have nothing to be ashamed of. Disney has confirmed that it will not be placing ads on Tucker Carlson tonight going forward, noting that a third-party buyer secured those spots in the first place, but they wouldn't do it even if they could. I would suggest to you that if you think this is business, think again. The head of T-Mobile tweeted that it had not run ads on Carlson's show since early May, but has canceled future ads. "We're not advertising on you, but we want you to know publicly we're not gonna." They added, "We will continue to support those who stand against racial injustice." As if Carlson doesn't. The question here is, what injustice? The plea was for better schools in black neighborhoods. The plea was to stop killing the unborn, or at least start educating people about abortions. These concepts are too offensive for T-Mobile, too offensive for Disney and Papa John. Tucker says it's nothing more or less than the 21st century version of book burning. In the old days, Africans were brought over here to work the fields. White men did this. But wait a minute. No, it was black men in Africa who sold them. It was the system over there in those days. History tells us it was largely revolving around Islam. More slaves were sold to Arab countries and other South Asian, European, and South American countries than were ever sold in the colonies by a huge margin. But nobody talks about that. It was our moral code that abolished this industry in 1870. A moral code derived from the Bible, which declares all human beings to be created in the image of God. Today, the liberals among us are determined to assuage the morally weak, intellectually challenged, and self-oriented among us, most of which are public school taught children, some of which have dark skin. Their effort is to undermine the principles found in the Bible. These people could care less about how people live or what they do, as long as they buy their products, watch their programs. In doing so, they believe they can get God out of our society and be free to say and do whatever they desire without guilt, without others imposing guilt upon them. Liberals in our nation. They have the earthly power to control what's heard, seen, thought. What they don't have is the divine power to make all this right. Say this aloud and they will cancel your show, or at least stop paying for you to say it. And oh, it's their right, their absolute right. So there are apparently some things which are absolutely right. Oops. About 25% of Americans say they see Donald Trump somewhat or strongly as a man of faith. According to the Politico Morning Consult poll, 55% of respondents said they somewhat or strongly disagree that the president is a man of faith. Even after nearly 3 or 4 voters saw coverage of President Trump's photo op, 3 in 4 voters saw the president's photo op at St. John's Episcopal Church last week, only about 1 in 4 believe he's religious. This according to the Morning Consult Vice President Tyler Sinclair. Sinclair was referring to a photo Trump took with a Bible in his hand in front of St. John's Episcopal Church in Washington. It's interesting to note the author of this piece didn't bother to capitalize the word "be" in Bible. As protests against racism spread throughout the world, demonstrators are tearing down statues of individuals with racist legacies. In Richmond, Virginia, demonstrators tore down a statue of Christopher Columbus, spray-painted it, set it on fire, threw it in the lake. Why? Well, Columbus has become a controversial figure, as his treatment of indigenous people during his explorations have tarred his legacy in recent years. Indigenous people refers to the inhabitants of this continent when Columbus arrived. Europeans mistreated these people in ways that are reprehensible. How? Well, officially their land was taken, especially if it was near the ocean or it was especially fertile. Their pride was also taken, as they were called Indians, as if this continent was really India, the land they were seeking, this new trade route. And their lives were taken in many different ways for selfish reasons by evil people and those who were not considered evil. The indigenous people of this continent did not own land. The land was a separate entity, almost human and very special. Indigenous people were helpful. Many a colonist owed his life to these people, from teaching them how to catch the fish here to how to farm the soil. Early settlers write of natives sharing food and teaching skills that kept them alive, especially during that first winter. Since 1991, several U.S. cities have chosen to celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day instead of Columbus Day. There is also a campaign to remove Columbus from schools' curricula. In the U.S., the issue of Confederate statues has also become a flashpoint. Last week, Virginia Governor Ralph Northam announced that the state would take down a statue of Confederate General Robert E. Lee. However, a Virginia judge issued an injunction to block the removal of that statue. In some European countries, statues of controversial figures are coming down. Demonstrators in Bristol, England, tore down a statue of a slave trader, rolled it into the river. We're being told that at least one notable statue has been completely covered up. I saw a picture of this great large wooden spire in the middle of a street. We're willing to throw away our history because it's inconvenient. While in Michigan, Lowell, Michigan Police Chief Steve Bucala was forced to resign this week after using the department's official Facebook page to praise 4 armed citizens who protected businesses from being looted. The chief wrote in a now-deleted Facebook post, quote, "We at the Lowell Police Department support the legally armed citizen and the Second Amendment," end of quote. According to WOOD-TV, City Manager Michael Burns said Bucala committed, quote, "conduct unbecoming a police officer," end of quote, and that he violated policy that, quote, "personnel should not be allowed personal feelings to influence their professional conduct," end of quote. Burns felt the Facebook post somehow inserted political and debatable issues into a departmental notice which caused unneeded concern by some city residents. He says your actions created an unnecessary negative portrayal of the city in some citizens' view. He felt. The city manager said Bukala overstepped his bounds by providing unneeded personal commentary and inserted political and debatable issues into a department notice, causing unneeded concern by some city residents. The chief was given until 5 p.m. on Thursday to resign. If he didn't do it at 5:01, he would be fired. Did you get all that? This city manager is operating on his feelings. Welcome to the 21st century. The reality here, either this city manager is a touchy-feely liberal, or he's making certain the community knows he's not in favor of this sort of Americanism. In Minneapolis, Mayor Jacob Frey, a Democrat, is refusing to support defunding the Minneapolis Police Department. You do know that's the new battle cry in Minneapolis and in many other places as well. Protesters reportedly marched to Frey's residence and demanded he speak with them. When he emerged, he affirmed much of what the protesters believed, including telling them, quote, the systemic racist system needs to be revamped. But the impromptu meeting took an unexpected turn when the protesters confronted Frey with a yes or no question. Yes or no, will you commit to defunding the Minneapolis Police Department? We don't want no more police. If it's a yes or a no, will you defund the Minneapolis Police Department? The woman vocalizing all this noted that it was important to hear Frey's answer and reminded the crowd that he is up for re-election next year. Finally, after many tense moments, Frey said, I do not support the full abolition of the police department. The raucous crowd immediately responded with loud boos and vulgar epithets calling for his resignation. Go home, Jacob, go home, they chanted. Minneapolis City Council President Lisa Bender confirmed last week to dismantling the Minneapolis Police Department and replacing it with what she called a transformative new model of public safety, whatever that is. She was later given a chance to clarify her stance on the police after the council signaled their intentions to abolish the police force. She said she wasn't really saying that she wanted to dismantle the police, only that she foresaw a police-free future. Can you follow all that? Probably not. And if you can't, you won't make a good politician. New York City's Mayor Bill de Blasio announced on Sunday last week that he would be shifting funds away from the police. The announcement comes after the defund the police movement gained some traction following the nationwide George Floyd protests. Mayor de Blasio said New Yorkers need to be reached, not policed. We'll be moving funding from the NYPD to youth initiatives and social services. This is a transformative moment, he said, so the actions today are a beginning. The reforms were suggested by the mayor's task force on racial inclusion, which is co-chaired by de Blasio's wife, First Lady Shirlene McCray. She doesn't take his name, she's liberal. The mayor did not reveal how much money would be redistributed. The NYPD's budget was $5.9 billion 2 years ago. Last week, New York City Comptroller Scott Stringer called for $1.1 billion of that to be cut, and to do that over 4 years. Breaking down structural racism in New York City, he said, will require long-term, lasting change, and that must include reducing the NYPD's budget. If our budget is a reflection of our values, it's unconscionable that services for black and brown New Yorkers are on the chopping block while the NYPD's budget remains almost entirely untouched. There's now a move to rename military bases in this country that reflect Confederate leaders. Fort Bragg in North Carolina, Fort Hood in Texas, Fort Benning in Georgia, Fort Pickett, A.P. Hill and Lee, Fort Polk and Camp Beauregard, Fort Hood, Fort Rucker. President Trump said he will not even consider renaming these or any military bases named after Confederate leaders. He said these monumental and very powerful bases have become part of a great American heritage and a history of winning, victory, and freedom. The United States of America trained and deployed our heroes on these hallowed grounds and won 2 world wars. Therefore, my administration will not even consider renaming these magnificent and fabled military installations. Our history as the greatest nation in the world will not be tampered with. Respect our military, he said. Last week, Virginia Governor Northam announced that the state would take down a statue of Confederate General Robert E. Lee, which he argued was erected to undo the results of the Civil War by other means. However, a Virginia judge issued an injunction to stop the removal of the statue. That was our nation this past week.